The tray landed with a thud, lighter than it should have been. A single slice of bread, a plastic cup of water, nothing more. The flight attendant leaned down, her smile practiced, but her voice sharpened to a blade. "This meal suits you." Her words sliced through the calm of the first-class cabin. For a split second, silence held. Then 2 men in pressed suits 3 rows back broke into chuckles, low, mocking, careless. The kind of laughter that isn't shared, only aimed. The man in seat 2C didn't laugh. He looked at the tray, then at the woman who had placed it in front of him. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed buried somewhere deeper, unshaken. Around him, crystal glasses clinked. Rich entrees steamed with aromas of garlic and wine. Plates heavy with indulgence moved from aisle to aisle, but not his. His was dry bread and water, staged humiliation masquerading as service. The attendant's eyes flicked once toward her supervisor at the galley door. A nod, almost invisible. Approval. This wasn't an accident, it was theater. Behind them, a passenger raised a phone halfway, hesitated, then lowered it. Another leaned in, whispering, "They actually gave him that?" A ripple of unease stirred across the cabin, but it was smothered quickly by the easy grin of a man in row 3, fork in hand, savoring a steak he hadn't ordered. The man in 2C stayed still. Still like stone, still like someone who had stood in storms harsher than this. His phone slipped from his pocket into his hand, smooth, silent. He pressed it to his ear. "Stay ready," he said just 3 words, low enough that only the air between him and the tray heard them. The attendant straightened, smirk tightening. "Is there a problem, sir?" He met her gaze, not with anger, not yet, but with the kind of silence that unnerves, the kind that promises this isn't over. Passengers glanced over shoulders now. A murmur grew, edged with discomfort, curiosity, disbelief. In first class, where whispers usually lived in champagne bubbles, tension now hung heavy. And in the center of it, a man who looked ordinary black shirt, no tie, no gold watch, sat carrying something no one around him could see, something waiting. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus Carter. The bread sat untouched. The water glistened under the cabin lights. The laughter faded, but the insult remained, etched into the pressurized air. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Not yet. Because sometimes the loudest sound in the room is silence, the kind that waits for the right moment to strike. Marcus Carter didn't look like the kind of man who belonged on a corporate jet. No tailored suit, no gold watch, no entourage trailing him down the aisle. Just a black button-down, dark jeans, and shoes polished enough to pass for professional but plain enough to disappear in a crowd. That was intentional. The ticket in his pocket was real first class, seat 2C, purchased under his actual name. He could have traveled on the airline's private charter fleet. He owned a quarter of it. But today wasn't about comfort. Today was about truth. Marcus had been watching the complaints pile up, emails from passengers ignored by PR, hashtags whispered in corners of social media. Number not first class. Number bias in the sky. Stories about how staff treated people differently based on clothes, skin, or just a feeling. He didn't need an outside consultant to tell him something was wrong. He wanted to see it himself. So he stripped away the markers of power. No Rolex, no Italian suit, no assistant by his side, just him and a boarding pass. When he stepped onto the plane earlier that afternoon, the first-class cabin barely noticed him. That was the point. He didn't want recognition. He wanted honesty. He wanted the crew to show him who they were when they thought no one important was watching. Now, staring at a tray of bread and water, he had his answer. The cabin around him glowed with quiet indulgence, crystal stemware catching light, leather seats reclined at perfect angles, flight attendants gliding with silver trays. Every detail whispered luxury. Yet somehow, the man who owned more of this airline than anyone else on board had been handed the kind of meal prisoners received on their worst day. Marcus didn't flinch. He had been here before. At 25, fresh out of business school, he was denied entry into an executive lounge because his shoes weren't polished enough. At 32, an investment banker had laughed at his credit card, assuming it was fake. And now, at 47, seated in first class on an airline he partly owned, he was told in silence and smirks that bread and water was enough for him. He let the memory pass through him like turbulence, not shaking him but reminding him why he built what he built. Every slight had been fuel, every dismissal, a blueprint for the empire he now commanded. Behind him, another laugh rang out sharper this time, a fork tapping against porcelain as if to punctuate the joke. A passenger raised a wine glass, smirked, and muttered something about knowing your place. Marcus didn't turn. His phone was still warm in his hand. His assistant, miles away in a corporate office, was already listening, already logging every word, every detail. This wasn't just a flight anymore. It was evidence. The bread sat untouched, the water beaded with condensation. Marcus sat silent, patient, because the difference between an insult and a downfall was timing, and he was very, very good with timing. The laughter didn't stay behind him. It crept forward, spilling into the aisle like smoke. "First class, huh?" One man muttered loud enough for half the cabin to hear. His tone dripped with amusement, not curiosity. Another leaned across his tray table, smirking. "Bread and water, guess that's the budget option." The flight attendant didn't correct them. She didn't say a word to defend the passenger she had just humiliated. Instead, she adjusted the crisp scarf at her collar, straightened her posture, and stepped back as if satisfied. Then came her supervisor, Nicole Harris, lead flight attendant, mid-30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp as if they'd been trained to slice through passengers. She approached Marcus's row with a clipboard in hand, scanning it once before lowering her gaze to him. "Sir," she said flatly, "your meal selection has been reassigned." Reassign. A word meant for software updates and flight schedules, not human dignity. Marcus didn't answer. Nicole gestured toward row 3, where a silver-haired man in a navy blazer swirled a glass of Bordeaux like it was his birthright. A full plate of salmon rested in front of him. "Our VIP member had priority," Nicole continued. "We expect your understanding." A murmur rippled through the cabin, some gasps, some chuckles, some simply watching with the uneasy thrill of a show. Marcus lowered his gaze to the tray. Bread, water, nothing else. When he looked up again, his expression hadn't shifted. Calm, unbothered. Yet the silence around him thickened, pressing against the walls like the air before a storm. Behind Nicole, her junior hesitated. A young trainee, Mia Lang, no more than 22, clutched a service pad against her chest. Her lips parted as if she might speak, then closed again when Nicole's eyes cut toward her like a warning. From row 4, a woman whispered, "That's not right." Her companion nudged her arm, shushing her. The man in the navy blazer raised his glass higher, catching the cabin lights. "Cheers," he said to no one in particular, but the smirk aimed itself toward Marcus. Laughter followed again, hollow and sharp. Nicole leaned closer, her voice low but biting. "If this isn't acceptable, sir, you're free to file a complaint after the flight. For now, please, enjoy what you've been served." The word enjoy lingered in the air, heavy with disdain. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply placed his phone back against his ear, his voice barely above a whisper. "Log everything," he said. The bread sat untouched. The water trembled slightly as the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. But the real turbulence was already alive in the cabin, invisible but undeniable, an atmosphere shifting, thickening, preparing to break. And somewhere between the laughter and the silence, passengers began to realize this wasn't just a bad meal. This was something else, something bigger. Marcus didn't move, not when the laughter rose again, not when Nicole's heels clicked against the aisle as she turned her back, victorious, not even when a passenger leaned over his seat with a grin, whispering just loud enough, "Guess you're not their kind of first class." He sat still, shoulders squared, hands resting lightly on the armrests. To anyone glancing, he looked like a man enduring mild inconvenience, but the stillness was deliberate, anchored, unshakable. The tray before him remained untouched, bread growing dry in the recycled air, water sweating into a small ring against polished plastic. Symbols, not food. Inside, Marcus's heartbeat was steady. Years had trained him for this, rooms where he was doubted, deals where his word was questioned, doors where his presence alone was treated as intrusion. Every insult stacked into a wall he had long since learned to lean against, never topple under. He reached for his phone again. No rush. No flourish, just a measured gesture. He pressed it to his ear. "They've escalated," he said quietly. His tone was calm, clipped, professional. On the other end, a woman's voice, his executive assistant, Rachel, answered instantly. Understood, logging live. He ended the call as smoothly as he began it. No one in the cabin could hear the details, but something about the way he lowered the phone back into his lap carried weight. Intent. The chuckles behind him faltered. Only slightly, but enough to shift the air. Mia, the trainee, still stood frozen near the galley. She watched Marcus with wide eyes, saw the way he carried silence like armor. Her lips parted again, wanting to speak, but the authority of her lead pressed her still. Nicole glanced back once, expecting to see a man simmering with outrage, but Marcus's face was composed, almost serene. That unnerved her more than shouting ever could. The plane vibrated softly as it cut through a patch of clouds. Silverware clinked, glasses chimed. Yet the true noise was the absence of his voice, the refusal to react on their terms. "In row 5, a woman whispered. "Why isn't he saying anything?" Her husband replied, "Because he doesn't have to." Marcus rested his elbows lightly on the armrests, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He didn't look at the bread. He didn't look at the smirking passenger across the aisle. He didn't even look at Nicole, now returning to the galley with a hint of triumph. Instead, he breathed in, slow, controlled. Because restraint wasn't weakness, it was timing. And timing, he knew, was everything. The cabin had expected protest, maybe even an argument. Instead, it got silence. And silence, in the right hands, was louder than rage. The cabin wasn't quiet anymore. It was watching. Mia Lang, the trainee in her crisp but slightly oversized uniform, stood near the galley door clutching her service pad like a shield. She had scanned Marcus's boarding pass at the gate herself, green light, valid, no error. She knew he was exactly where he belonged, yet here she was, watching her supervisor strip him of dignity, plate by plate. Her fingers twitched. She wanted to say something, to step forward. But Nicole's earlier glare still burned like a warning. Stay silent if you want this job. In row 4, Emma Larson, a marketing manager from Minnesota traveling for a conference, angled her phone against her purse. The red light blinked once before she lowered it. "I should film this," she whispered to her seatmate. Michael Grant, mid-40s, shook his head at first. Could be nothing. But even he couldn't look away from the absurd sight. A man in first class served like a stowaway while others feasted. Across the aisle, a younger passenger leaned in, whispering too loudly, "Betty snuck in with points. Probably not even supposed to be here." The words reached Marcus's row. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. The bread sat untouched. The water caught the light with each tremor of turbulence. It looked more symbolic now. Less mistake, more statement. Emma's phone hovered again. This time, she hit record. "This isn't right," she muttered under her breath, the words caught by the microphone. "He's not raising his voice. He's not doing anything. And they're treating him like this." Michael adjusted in his seat, uneasy. "Careful, they'll throw you off for interfering." Emma shook her head, steady. "Then let them. People need to see this." Meanwhile, Mia took one half step forward. Her lips moved soundlessly. "His ticket is real," but the words never made it past her throat. She clutched the pad tighter, swallowed hard, and froze again. At the back of the cabin, another passenger cleared his throat. A father traveling with his teenage son, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. "That's not policy," he muttered, just loud enough for his son to hear. The boy nodded, gripping his earbuds but not daring to look away. The witnesses weren't united yet, not bold enough to speak together, but their silence was shifting. Phones hovered, eyes narrowed, judgment brewed. And Marcus, still silent, still steady, wasn't just enduring humiliation. He was gathering proof. Every chuckle, every smirk, every whisper, logged not only by Rachel on the other end of his phone, but by the strangers now leaning forward, deciding whether to stand with him or shrink back into comfort. The bread remained untouched. The water beaded and slipped down the cup's side like seconds ticking away. Something was building. Everyone could feel it. No one could name it. Yet, Nicole returned down the aisle, clipboard tucked under her arm, posture tall as if she carried the authority of the entire airline in her stride. The chatter quieted when she stopped at Marcus's row again. "Sir," she said louder this time, projecting so nearby passengers could hear, "we cannot reassign your meal. The entree has already been delivered to a priority member." Her voice framed it like a policy, but the way she emphasized priority carried something else. An edge, a warning. From row 3, the silver-haired man with the Bordeaux smirked again. He raised his fork with a bite of salmon and said, "Best I've ever had. Shame some people can't appreciate real first class." The woman beside him laughed, not at the food, but at Marcus. Murmurs rippled across the cabin, not hushed anymore. Probably a mistake booking. Looks out of place, doesn't he? Bread and water. Maybe that's all he paid for. Emma's phone caught it all, the lens angled just above her tray table. Michael leaned closer now, whispering, "This is going to blow up online." Marcus didn't look their way. His stillness was the sharpest contrast in the room. Where others fidgeted, smirked, or whispered, he simply Saturday. Nicole's patience thinned. She leaned closer, voice firm enough to echo, "If you're unsatisfied, you may file a complaint after we land. Until then, we expect compliance. Don't disrupt service for our other passengers." The word compliance landed heavy. Not service, not courtesy, compliance. Mia shifted behind her lead, lips parting, but she caught Nicole's sharp glance. The warning was clear: silence. Her knuckles whitened around her service pad. The passenger across the aisle, a man in a pinstripe suit, finally spoke up, emboldened by Nicole's tone. "Look, some of us paid for this cabin. Don't drag it down with complaints. Be grateful you're here at all." The words drew a low chuckle from the back of the section. Another man muttered, "Exactly. If he doesn't like it, economy's wide open." It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a chorus building. Some amused, some dismissive, some openly hostile. The first-class cabin, usually a cocoon of silence and privilege, had become a courtroom with Marcus in the defendant's chair. The bread remained, the water trembled with every vibration of the plane, and Marcus, still silent, still calm, let the scene unravel without lifting a hand. Because what they thought was submission was strategy. The tension finally snapped. Nicole returned a third time, this time without the clipboard. In her hand, she carried a plated entree glazed chicken, seasonal vegetables, steam still rising. But she didn't set it down for Marcus. She stopped at his row, leaned across, and placed it directly in front of the man with the Bordeaux. "Another serving for our VIP," she announced, her voice carrying across the cabin. The silver-haired man smiled, fork ready. He looked at Marcus just long enough for the message to land. "This was meant for you. Now it's mine." A ripple of laughter passed through the aisle. Not everyone joined in, but no one stopped it. Then came the final insult. Nicole reached down, lifted Marcus's tray with its dry bread and sweating cup of water, and held it up like it was waste to be cleared. "We'll remove this if you're not eating," she said briskly. "It's disrupting service." She didn't wait for permission. The tray vanished into her hands, bread sliding slightly as the water sloshed in its cup. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Glass against plastic, humiliation against silence. Gasps stirred now. Not laughter gasps. Even those who had whispered earlier couldn't deny what they had just seen. A paying passenger stripped of a meal, handed scraps, then cleared as though he were trash. Emma's phone shook in her hands as she whispered into the recording, "They just took his food. They actually took it away." Michael muttered, "That's not procedure, that's personal." Behind them, the father with his teenage son leaned forward, his voice rough. "That's theft. They can't do that." The boy's eyes widened, clutching his seatbelt tighter. But Nicole was unshaken. She pivoted smoothly, carrying the tray back toward the galley without a flicker of hesitation. To her, this wasn't misconduct, it was control. The pinstripe passenger across the aisle smirked. "Guess that settles it. Should have known better than to expect 5 stars. His words were followed by another low chuckle, a chain reaction of mockery that ricocheted through the cabin. And still, Marcus didn't move. His hands rested calmly on the armrests. His eyes followed the tray as it disappeared behind the curtain, then returned to the aisle in front of him. No outburst, no plea. The silence was heavier now, almost unbearable. To some, it looked like surrender. To others, like restraint, sharpened into something dangerous. Mia couldn't stand still anymore. She stepped half into the aisle, voice trembling. His boarding pass." But Nicole's voice snapped like a whip from the galley curtain. "Mia, sit down." The trainee froze, retreating under the weight of authority. But not before Marcus caught her eyes wide, conflicted, honest. For the first time, someone had nearly spoken truth aloud. The cabin held its breath. The bread was gone. The water was gone. And with them, any illusion that this was a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. It was personal, and it had just crossed a line. Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Not rushed, not shaken, measured, precise. The kind of movement that carried intention. His phone emerged again. screen glowing faintly against the dimmed cabin lights. He pressed one button. The line connected instantly. "Rachel," he said, his voice low but clear. "Mark this moment. 1942. Cabin 1 Ampere through 4C. Document everything." Her reply was immediate. "Logged. Do you want escalation?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Activate protocol, level 3. Passengers close enough to hear shifted in their seats. The words weren't shouted, but they carried a weight that clung to the air. Protocol. It didn't sound like the language of a passenger. It sounded like the language of command. The pinstripe passenger across the aisle frowned, his smirk faltering. "What? Protocol?" he muttered under his breath. From behind the curtain, Nicole reappeared, tray now empty. "Sir, cell phone use is restricted. I'll have to—" She froze when Marcus lifted his gaze to hers, steady and unblinking. He didn't raise his voice, but the silence that stretched between them cut sharper than any outburst. "I'm on business," he said evenly, "and you'll want this call documented." Nicole's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, her confidence cracked, if only for a flicker. She retreated without another word. Emma's phone was still recording from the tray table. She whispered into it, barely audible. "He said protocol, level 3. What does that even mean?" Michael leaned in, voice hushed. "Whatever it is." She looked scared. At the back of the cabin, the father with his son nodded slowly. "That wasn't a passenger talking. That was someone pulling strings." His son whispered back, "Dad, who is he?" Mia, still frozen by the galley, felt her throat tighten. She knew enough to recognize authority when she heard it. This wasn't bluff. This was leverage. Marcus lowered his phone without ending the call, resting it lightly on his knee. He didn't need to say more. The line was open. The world outside the plane was listening now. The cabin seemed smaller suddenly, the air tighter. Those who had laughed minutes earlier now shifted uncomfortably, their amusement curdling into unease. For the first time since the bread and water had been placed in front of him, Marcus moved with purpose. He straightened in his seat, adjusted the cuff of his shirt, and folded his hands calmly in his lap. He didn't look at the passengers. He didn't look at the crew. He simply waited, because the shift had already begun. The game was no longer about humiliation. It was about consequence, and Marcus Carter was done playing defense. The seatbelt sign pinged as the plane began its descent. Outside the windows, city lights shimmered like scattered jewels. Inside the cabin, tension pressed heavier than the air at 30,000 feet. Marcus rose, smooth, controlled. No announcement, no theatrics, just the quiet authority of someone who knew every eye was already on him. Nicole took a step forward, instinctively blocking the aisle. "Sir, please remain seated until—" Marcus cut her off without raising his voice. "You've spoken enough." The words weren't loud, but they carried finality, the kind that silenced laughter, stilled movement, and pulled every gaze toward him. He turned slightly, phone still in hand. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm, steady, "confirm to the cabin." The speaker crackled faintly, then Rachel's voice, professional, unwavering, filled the first-class section. "This is confirmation for Mr. Marcus Carter, majority shareholder and chairman of the Quality Oversight Board for Horizon Airlines. Documentation of this incident is live-streamed to corporate servers." The cabin froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Glasses stilled mid-air. The man with the Bordeaux paled, lowering his fork like it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. Nicole's face drained of color. She blinked, lips parting, but no words emerged. The authority she wielded minutes ago had evaporated in a single sentence. Emma whispered into her phone, "He owns them. He actually owns the airline." Her seatmate Michael exhaled, muttering, "No wonder he didn't react. He didn't have to." Mia's eyes widened, her service pad slipping slightly in her grip. Relief and dread mingled across her face. She had seen the green boarding pass scan. She had known he belonged here. Now the world knew it too. The father leaned closer to his son. "Remember this," he said quietly. "That's what real power looks like." Marcus let the silence linger. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply allowed the weight of his identity to settle into every corner of the cabin. Finally, he spoke not to the crew, not to the passengers, but to the room itself. "I came here today to see how you treat people when you think no one's watching. Now everyone island—" The words hung suspended, unshakable. The bread and water were gone. The insults couldn't be taken back. And now the truth was undeniable. The man they had dismissed, mocked, and humiliated, held the fate of the entire crew in his hands. For a moment, no one moved. The first-class cabin, once buzzing with laughter and smirks, had turned into a vacuum of stunned silence. Nicole's clipboard slipped from her hand, clattering onto the carpet with a sound louder than it should have been. She bent to grab it, but her fingers trembled. The certainty she wore like armor had cracked open. The man with the Bordeaux, so smug minutes before, pushed his plate away as if it had soured in front of him. He glanced at Marcus, then down at his hands, unable to meet the eyes of the man whose meal he had stolen. Pinstripe across the aisle coughed, shifting uncomfortably. He adjusted his tie twice, then reached for his glass of water with a hand that wouldn't steady. He'd been bold when Marcus was nobody. Now, the weight of his words pressed like stones on his chest. Emma's phone kept rolling, the red light blinking steady. She whispered to Michael, "Do you see their faces? They're terrified." Michael nodded, muttering, "As they should be." At the back, the father squeezed his son's shoulder. "You just saw arrogance collapse," he said softly. The boy's eyes shone wide, recording every detail, every shift of power. Mia stepped forward, her voice breaking free for the first time. I scanned his ticket. It was valid. He belonged here." Her words trembled but rang with clarity, like a bell cutting through fog. Nicole spun toward her, eyes blazing, but the fury died before it could ignite. She had no authority left to wield. Everyone in the cabin had heard Rachel's confirmation. Everyone now knew who Marcus was. Passengers who had laughed minutes earlier now hid behind silence, their smirks wiped clean. Phones appeared, some discreet, some brazen. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was documentation. The air shifted, no longer charged with mockery, but with accountability. The same passengers who had whispered, "He doesn't belong," now whispered, "What have we done?" Marcus remained standing, posture calm, hands steady at his sides. He didn't revel in their panic. He let it unfold naturally, like a storm he had seen gather countless times before. One truth had rewritten the entire cabin, and now, everyone who had played a part in his humiliation stood exposed beneath it. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane prepared for landing, but the air inside burned brighter with tension. Every eye was locked on Marcus, some wide with shame, others with fear, a few with dawning respect. He raised his phone again, voice calm as stone. "Rachel, initiate removal protocol, effective immediately." A pause, then her reply echoed through the open line. "Confirmed. Crew IDs flagged. Access suspended. Hand over to HR and compliance within the hour." The words hit harder than turbulence. Nicole's eyes widened, her hand flying instinctively to the badge clipped to her uniform. A sharp beep sounded from it, red light blinking. She tapped it again and again, but the system had already locked her out. Across the aisle, two attendants glanced at their badges. Same red blink, same finality. Mia gasped softly. Her badge stayed green. Relief flooded her face, mixed with disbelief. She hadn't spoken much, but she had tried. She hadn't joined the chorus of mockery, and that had mattered. Nicole's voice cracked as she stepped forward, desperate. You can't do this mid-flight." Marcus's gaze silenced her. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply spoke. Every word a verdict. "I don't need to wait for landing to decide your future. That decision was made the moment you decided mine wasn't worth dignity." The Bordeaux man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly shrinking in presence. The pinstripe passenger avoided eye contact altogether, staring at the safety card as though it might save him from the moment. Emma whispered into her phone, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "He just fired them. Right here. Right now. Their badges went red." Michael muttered back, "This is history." At the rear, the father spoke low to his son. "Watch closely. This is justice without a gavel. No courtroom. Just consequence." Nicole's defiance crumbled. She sank into an empty seat, badge still flashing red, her posture collapsing under the truth she couldn't escape. Marcus ended the call with a single tap. Then he turned to the cabin, his tone measured. "Final. Let this be clear. Position is not power. Conduct island, and today conduct ended careers." No applause followed. Not yet. The moment was too raw, too sharp. But the silence carried its own weight, filled with the knowledge that justice had already been served before the plane even touched ground. The wheels screeched softly against the runway, a jolt running through the cabin as the aircraft touched down. Seatbelts clicked tighter, trays rattled, but no one in first class noticed. Their eyes were still on Marcus. He remained standing, tall in the narrow aisle, steady as the plane rolled to taxi. The silence was different now, no longer mocking, no longer curious. It was reverent, heavy with recognition. Nicole sat slumped, her badge still blinking red. The other attendants avoided his gaze, their futures sealed before the plane even reached the gate. Passengers who had laughed minutes earlier now studied the floor, their privilege suddenly flimsy. Emma lowered her phone, her hands trembling. "It's done," she whispered. "He ended it." Michael nodded, voice low. And he didn't raise his voice once. Mia, the trainee, finally exhaled, her badge still green, her career spared. Her eyes glistened with both relief and awe. She whispered a thank you, but Marcus didn't need to hear it. He had already decided who deserved a second chance. The father at the back leaned into his son's ear. "You'll tell this story one day. Remember the man who didn't shout to win? He just stood." The boy nodded, his gaze fixed on Marcus like he was watching a lesson carved into stone. As the plane slowed to its final stop, Marcus adjusted his cuff, then turned to face the cabin fully. His voice carried not with volume, but with weight. "Respect isn't a seat. It isn't a meal. It isn't a title you hand out when you feel generous. Respect is the minimum. And when you forget that, you lose more than a job. You lose the right to serve." The words dropped into the silence like a gavel striking wood. Final. Irrefutable. No one clapped. Not yet. The gravity was too heavy, but heads bowed, eyes lowered. And in that silence, the truth was louder than any applause. Marcus gathered nothing, no luggage, no dramatics. He stepped down the aisle slowly, each stride measured, the embodiment of power carried in restraint. The door opened, sunlight spilling into the jet bridge. He paused once, hand on the frame, and turned back just enough for his last words. "You mistook silence for weakness. That was your last mistake." Then he walked off the plane. The cabin remained frozen, the echo of his words lingering long after he was gone.